good.
Now I can find you. Well, full hands.
Happy New Year.
Thank you, Nita. You too.
Hello, Heather.
In some ways, I'm like, how are we through January already? And then in other ways, I was like,
Hi, Brian. Sorry, you got my note. I'm
Yeah.
carpooling.
Understand.
This weekend felt so long.
it was
I'm
nice.
like,
That
oh,
extra
it's
day.
cool.
Oh, I enjoyed it. Actually. Monday was, I did some big,
They started up again.
Yesterday afternoon, I was
Right.
like, get.
Yeah, for us, I'm okay. It's just like, it's a gauntlet of hockey.
Yeah.
Three kids in 3 cities.
Oh my gosh.
Running around.
Yeah. No, we were home.
But I will say for all the years, that I've played probably more than most. I'm not a good sport. Like I wasn't an athlete growing up, so like being in this world. But my son's a senior and he's got 4 home games left now. And I'm actually like, oh,
Yeah.
well, enjoy the free time, but I will still be sad to see it
Totally.
go.
Well, it's been the routine dominating your life for a long time.
It has, I mean, from like September through March. Yeah, first thing we do.
We
And continue.
Reagan playing softball started crocheting, actually really like help at the games. That you could like pay attention, but not be obsessed. And it was like just enough to like, you're doing something, you can like pick it up, put it down, and the same with the game, perfect.
I read a book. You're much more engaged than I am in some of those games. I'm like,
Oh,
yeah, baseball, I literally will sit there with the book because
yeah.
I remember years ago.
she's 8th grade this year, right? Is she gonna play for the middle school again, or is she doing it?
Yeah, because she's playing on a travel team, but
Hi.
also playing solo.
Fine, how are you?
And good to see you. So they're gonna play. You know, yeah, well, imagine so.
Drill down.
They're like, grade, I would say, and a little crew.
Yeah.
And then I guess I'm not
Oh,
really engaged
I didn't.
with.
Don't say. I didn't see that.
I'm like not playing.
Yeah. He would next year. For this year.
Well, Richard, they're gonna pitch and she's like, I'm catching. Does pitching, not doing that anymore.
Are you?
Right. How are you?
Hey.
Link to them.
Yeah.
It wasn't on the agenda.
Did, probably didn't include you, yeah, okay, email it to you?
Yeah,
or-
that'd be great.
Um. Yeah. Are you free, Mike?
Me as much as them.
No, it's not the thing. I mean, everybody it seems.
I saw Joe.
Oh, we put the electric. I did not.
She did that.
You're doing-
I was agree.
Oh.
Yeah.
And it's automatic for me. Yeah, you didn't, well, you have to talk whatever. It's like,
You know, I'm good with that.
you know, we train. So, yeah, I
But she
want
didn't let.
dogs and kittens. I want landscape. Yeah, yeah, landscape. I do landscape, the consequences. I think there was.
Yeah.
They didn't have it.
And then it goes through.
Yeah.
You know, we, I think you can talk.
They did it.
One of the dogs.
So that was, that's why we have the 28. Looking for the gavel.
That's what we really have to do.
We're not.
Yeah, so we have. Like the eighth time, I'll say, I don't think that they showed up. We could play them here, line up to play them actually in the second round. And they will swing our butts.
I only realized that the name, but we have to get it for us.
So, but yeah, it's really.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to not see an ad or a building, something anywhere you go, right?
Nice to see you. Unless he's gonna sit up there with him. Helen, I just sent it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Yeah. I can pull it back in the corner.
Your preference. Whatever you feel comfortable with, Kurt.
Why?
Still be down. The place, don't be expulsion, it'll be like 3 hours and sort of like.
Okay. Yes, I'm trying to pull up all my files here and. It's like that. Yeah, trying to do it at the same time. Okay. Okay, we are recording you. 2 people entered the. Hey, Shelley, and then. There we go. Okay. So. Okay. So let's see, we got. Maybe, yeah.
Hey, Bryan.
Oh, we're sure Isaac. And Emmitt and Anthony, Tony, are not going to be able to join us, or if they do, it'll be late via Zoom.
Okay.
But let's wait, a few minutes here for Jeff to come back and then we'll get started. So Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Brian, this is your last year. Last gap year. That's right. At least it's treasurer.
Yeah, you can sit there.
Oh, that's it.
I don't think
You don't need the days, right?
No.
You don't think I got that far.
I don't have fingers and toes, you know.
It escalated.
Let's see. Okay. So, as I said earlier, Emmitt and Tony are unable to attend this evening, but so Ms. Lora Cover, the new vice president for the school board, will be chairing the meeting, and Tony's there.
I mean, I feel like when Jeff said it's escalated quickly, it's like, it's actually de-escalated quickly. But yeah. But I will try to multi these. That's okay. So just,
I'll go order.
all right, let's call the order.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Armstrong,
Here.
Ms. Cover,
Here.
Dr. Jolly is not going to be able to join us. Mr. Kolb,
Here.
Mr. Meyerhoefer,
Here.
Ms. Miller,
Here.
Mr. Roach, I don't believe he's going to be able to join us. Mr. Romano,
Here.
and Mr. Peebles will be unable to attend. Note for the record, also joining us this evening are board member Jeff Isaacs. Welcome, Jeff. And on Zoom, we have board member Heather Weingart. And Linda, you and Helen want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Linda Lally, board member voters. Hard to roll that off my tongue. Helen Sheehan, Shaker resident.
James?
Yep. James Schmidt, yes, President James Schmidt, science teacher at high school.
Kurt?
Kurt Miller.
Okay, welcome. Oh, in Zoom, let's see, yes. Somebody wanting to get in. Yeah. There we go. Okay. See, also joining us remotely, virtually, Doug Wang, Julie Vargo, my assistant treasurer, Shelley McDermott, Amber Malik, and Nolan John. Welcome all. We will try and present when it's appropriate, so in case anybody's asking. With that, we move on to approval of previous meeting minutes. You want to ask for a motion?
Sure. You have a motion, a second for minutes.
So moved.
Any comments, questions, about minutes? Ready to vote?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Hearing none, motion carries. And at this point, then we move on to section 2.1 for the superintendent's update. Welcome, Dr. Glasner.
Thank you. Always good to see everybody here. I'll keep this relatively brief. I know that the majority of our time here will be around facilities planning, so I will leave that topic aside for my update. Just a couple of things I wanted this committee to be aware of. First of all, I imagine some of you may have been able to participate or engage in the programming that we had with the celebration of the King's life and legacy over the past few days. Some incredibly powerful opportunities for our students, for our community. Highlights included an opportunity to hear from Dr. Reverend Otis Moss, Jr., who spoke to the entire community on Thursday evening. He also had an opportunity with students earlier in the day at the Maltz Museum. Just a note about that program, really all of the beloved community events, I think this was actually a great example of the Forward Together collaborative effort process in being realized. This is the first year where we have planned a celebration related to Martin Luther King's life and legacy in collaboration with the city and with the library and with other community partners like the PTO and Jacob Schools Foundation. So that was really exciting. I would say on a side note, but also important, Dr. Reverend Otis Moss Jr.'s son, Reverend Otis Moss III, spoke at the Maltz Museum yesterday, and is also here sharing information about his new book and book signing. That he spoke about his experience here in Shaker Heights. And was incredibly well received. The Maltz Museum has, as you know, an exhibit about the civil rights movement, pictures from the civil rights movement. As part of the events yesterday, they had a hologram interview, which some of you may have heard about with Reverend Dr. Otis Moss Jr., which I got to see, and that was also pretty exciting. And I hope that that is part of a longer and bigger effort to be able to capture the legacy, the testimony of civil rights leaders and others for students and others for many generations to come. So great programming, great event. I hope you're able to participate in some or much of that. I also, we don't talk often about our career and technical education programming here in this space, but I did want everybody here to know that We have really continued to ramp up efforts to strengthen both the career and technical education consortium that we're a part of with other school districts, but also our own pathways that we are offering here in Shaker Heights. So as many of you know, for the first time ever, we offer a career technical education pathway, CTE pathway here in Shaker, robotics and advanced manufacturing. Students from other consortium member districts can and do enroll in those courses here in Shaker, just like we have students go out to other districts to participate in other programming. I had the opportunity recently to go visit Cleveland Heights University Heights, to go visit a number of the different programs that they have there. I'm probably going to get the exact titles wrong, but like sound and video editing, like cosmetology, like pharmaceutics. There's an emergency medical technician program that we got to see. So it's pretty exciting. We're continuously looking at ways that we can both make sure that we're expanding access and awareness of our CTE programming and thinking about how we can expand CTE pathways here in Shaker Heights. So more to follow over the next month, but I wanted you to know that that is an important part of the work. Last but not least, I just wanted to mention as a note, we pushed out a note communication about this last week and include this in our board packet, but the calendar for next school year is revised for a number of different reasons. Probably most importantly, some of our collective bargaining terms have changed to include additional professional learning days focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those days are not meant to take days away from students. So we're looking at ways we can add additional teacher days to our calendar without taking away student days that may have an impact on other parts of the schedule. We'll be sharing a draft of that calendar with the board at the February board meeting. There are rules we follow, so it won't be approved until later in the spring, I think, the May board meeting. But if you get any questions about that, we're happy to answer them. I just at this point want folks to know that some of the dates in the calendar change. That includes my report and update, other than I'm going to be spending a lot of time on my long-term facilities plan. So happy to answer any questions.
Any reaction to New York Times article?
I've spoken to a few people about it. The folks I've spoken with, some mixed reactions, I guess I would say. I think the fact that the article lifted up this question or this issue around black flight from the district, I think has been important. I think there have been other questions related to the evidence presented, data presented in the article, and how closely it supports or doesn't support the thesis of the article. So most of the people who have reached out to me had more questions than responses. So I know it's a very good answer, but the reactions that
Your reaction.
My reaction, not particularly positive. I mean, let me just be clear. I think, like I said, it's good that it brings up an issue that we have, and I've spoken about before, this question and issue around black flight, which we often talk about white flight in our district. I think, unfortunately, the narrative that's portrayed in the article, I don't find to be particularly accurate in my conversations with families, even the families that were highlighted in the article. If the article is trying to make the case that Black families are leaving because of changes we've made in the school district over the past couple of years, that has both not been my experience, nor do I think the article supported that. The families that left in the article left before these changes were implemented, or were considering moving before the changes were implemented. So I think that's important. I think the data that the article shares isn't particularly nuanced. We've shared some of the enrollment data that is a little more nuanced. I also think that the issues that the article raises are not unique to Shaker. So I know the article talks a little bit about Solon. I've spoken with a number of folks from Solon recently who have shared their own challenges with the Solon district. And that's not on Solon. It is a reality that many school districts struggle with some of the issues that are raised in this article. So those are some of my initial thoughts. Of course, Jeff, Lora, others.
I went back into the ODE website numbers a little bit, and I think the notion that Solon has somehow gained Black students is misleading, because she took a time frame that shows that. But if you go back 10 years, Solon's actually lost African-American students. So I think that what Dr. Glasner said is right, that the evidence that's presented in the article needs to be scrutinized. I think that she made some mistakes.
The only thing I would add is, so one was in the real estate section, which I just think is interesting, right? That this is, it's real estate, but we're not actually talking to the mayor or city council members or any, like it feels like a sort of a weird spot for it. And I personally read it as, yes, Schaefer is not the wealthiest community in the country anymore. And with that, things change. And it felt much more like this was a class conversation that was happening, but she never really pulled it out. There's one line she has in the article that kind of pulls at it, saying, people in Shaker say they're not elitist, but it felt like a really important question around class and to what extent those biases are coming in, and both Black community and white communities comfort with people that are in our community that maybe have less or more wealth. But she didn't tackle that, nor would you think you would tackle that in a real estate article. But it felt sort of off in terms of what she was trying to get at. And I had a very sort of like interesting personal reaction of, you know, the way I read news. So I happen to know a little bit more about this topic. I was like, oh, this is kind of biased. There's actually no data in here. It's using anecdotes, which matter, right? Like perception matters quite a bit. But it was using these anecdotes, and I was appreciating how I read other articles, and I'm like, yes, I totally agree with that same eye. So it's appreciating there's like a little bit of defensiveness in it for sure at the end school board. And yeah, I was a little bit sad. And Dr. Glasner made a comment that I did appreciate, that the blessing and the curse of having many of our alumni go into journalism. They continue to write about us. So yeah.
If I could question one piece of data from that. She suggested that I believe it was African American achievement on the ODE test 5th and 6th grade was in the 70s 15 years ago and is now in the higher 20s. Was that at all accurate?
I'd have to go back and look at that specific data point in the article. One thing that I haven't yet memorized the article, but one thing that she did not reference is the pandemic. And I remember she brought data points up. Every district in the country experienced a pretty significant decline in student achievement across demographic subgroups, including Black student subgroups. And that was a result of the pandemic, or at least connected to the pandemic. So I found that to be a little bit, missing a pretty key piece of information. Right, statistically, right, you probably didn't share the full picture. But I'd have to go back and look specifically.
And my recollection is the African American achievement was never in the 70s. Because the passing rate was 75-ish, as I recall. And it was always, we did it for a number of years. Whites would be in the 90s, African Americans basically in the 50s. We'd average in the low 70s and not as a district hit the 75. Come close, but not hit that.
I think in that 15-year time span, also there was a major redo of the tests that were used, and the cutoff levels changed. So it was a little bit apples to pomegranates in terms of comparison.
John, curious what you think. The article.
My impression was that it's maybe relatively important for the reason we're here. And I think that if I'm going to try to sell 200 million or some very significant number, universal pre-K has to be part of it. And I sense, not to be misleading, but that some of the presentations, and Bryan has said this, if you have $100,000 house, it's so many dollars per year for that would go to the facilities that are funded by OFCC. And then remember, we'd have to have more LFI for pre-K. It almost seems like if we reverse this and say, is a basis for addressing student achievement, pre-K is what we're going to build on. And that's going to cost us whatever. It may not be covered by the government. In fact, right now it isn't. Then we want to get our district in order. But the pre-K isn't something we add on the top later. It's something we lead with.
The other thing we were talking about too is I think that I think the OFCC, like that, just language has been, it's become sort of this overarching OFCC facilities planning, or together, all these things are becoming synonymous in some weird ways. And actually, we need to be talking about is this is the facilities plan. This is the part of it that OFCC is going to be contributing to. But this is the overall facilities plan. And to your point, we can have a central percent.
I think I would focus, that was one of my takeaways from watching the video of your meeting on the night. But the message of, again, as you try to sell the idea, this is the achievement that the school district is trying to accomplish, and it needs this kind of operating thing, it needs to offer these services pre-K, and it needs facilities in which to conduct those things. And so the idea of flipping it on the head, because as a relatively, you know, a little bit more than the average person watching that Zoom of the night, to borrow a full phrase from my friend Linda Lally, it sounded like it was all inside baseball all night long. And even I was kind of like, what the hell? None of this number makes sense. Or what's going on? Have we, you know, do we realize? Yeah, it's just, so I think Joe, I really respect Joe's comment about leveraging kind of this article maybe as a way to flip it on its head. You still have to have the facts, right? But this idea of this is what we're trying to accomplish here. And by the way, here's the difference maker pre-K and the supporting difference maker. So and I think I quite thought of it that way. I was thinking more you got to get back to achievement because of the inside baseball numbers. You've gotten 4 options now that are all mathematically equivalent within the margin of error. So now it's back to the test.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the superintendent?
I actually had a mundane, but Joe just got a sensational. But the CTE program, somebody else from who was at their kids go to CHUH was saying that is there some momentum out of the Columbus to help fund some of the CTE stuff?
We do receive funding, grants funding.
Tiny to just a pinky bit or
Exactly.
Federal money.
it's federal?
Purposes, yeah. But CP has a pretty good lobby.
Okay.
And we have never, until this last couple of years, didn't have any in-house, that's not true. Several years ago, we had a couple in-house classes, I think it was marketing at high school. But so it's kind of resurgent with the new program.
Yeah, I think
we're
there has
actually getting
been,
kids from other schools.
I think there has been a lot of publicity, advocacy in Columbus and elsewhere around the idea of preparing students for industry, especially like to try to develop industry pipelines in Ohio, has been part of it. They have made some changes to graduation requirements, which allow for kind of students getting credit for participating in more group event. So
It'll be interesting to see also on that magnet school does. See them
you mean the new magnet?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a chance to visit there
Oh, you
a
did?
couple weeks ago. Yeah, it's a great facility. They also, and I expect we will be able to take Shaker students to visit the facility. Also, they do some work. They have more intensive kind of residencies for CMSD students. They also have more one-off opportunities for other students. So I hope the students are good.
Thank you.
All right, I think at this point, then we move into 2.2. To continue our discussion on long-term facilities planning and Jeff Grosse, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to give any kind of a facilities update, any other projects or anything that you wanted to update. Before we dive in. All right. So I think one of the items that we wanted to kind of focus on was we did have the link in the agenda in section 2.2 for the January 9th board meeting, and some of you mentioned you had watched it.
Binge watching, Bryan, binge watching.
Binge watching, right? We've also included a link to a basically kind of a synopsis of the discussion. And if I can click on that, right? Got a bunch of things up here. Here we go. This was kind of a summary of the January 9th rather board meeting. And I think we want to kind of focus on, and obviously there's also the PowerPoint was attached to the agenda as well from that January 9th board meeting. Which if anyone has any specific questions, we can go over, but I think we wanted to kind of focus on some of what the board's consensus, if you will, or sense of maybe consensus maybe is not the correct word, but it wasn't an official vote by any stretch, but kind of a discussion about the direction that the district will be further exploring regarding expanding the renovated elementary buildings to accommodate the 5th grade classrooms. Locating possible centralized preschool at Ludlow or decentralized locations in some elementary buildings. I don't think we kind of got that one locked down yet. Building a new high school in the current high school campus area and renovating Woodbury with additions to create a 68 middle years building. So David,
Yeah, I mean, this kind of just sets the stage really for our conversation here this evening, which I know we'll be focusing more on segmenting, but you know, in terms of what we're looking at and kind of the direction we're learning more about, kind of just to reiterate what Bryan shared, expanding elementary buildings to be able to accommodate 5th grade. Just to be clear about that, we believe we can accommodate 5th grade in all of our elementary buildings essentially tomorrow, when we do, except for Fernwood. So when we think about that word expanding renovated elementary buildings really is especially relevant to Fernwood and being able to make sure we can fit 5th grade.
Could you fit 5th grade in the buildings? Like, I know some of the conversation was around the zoning, like, do you physically have room in across the 5 buildings to fit K through 5? Based on the number of total students if they were redistributed?
It would get tighter at the four buildings that aren't Fernway. It would get tighter, obviously, because we'd be moving some Fernway students to those buildings. It may be possible from a numbers perspective, it would be a little more tight. And I think we'd have to consider what that would do to Fernway. Both in terms of, you know, shrinking the size a little bit of each grade level, but also the challenges that we might encounter in terms of making sure that Fernway is a racially diverse, socioeconomically diverse building. I think there are some unique challenges with Fernway's dependent zone. So that's something to consider. In terms of pre-K, and we'll be talking a little bit about this soon, we still have more work to do on pre-K and figuring out what model makes the most sense. If you listen to the board meeting prior from some of the pre-K teachers, talk about their experiences. We are looking at Ludlow as possibly a site where we could have a centralized pre-K program. There's also the possibility of having pre-K programs at some of our elementary buildings. That would likely require building some additions onto those elementary buildings. We're still working on getting some additional information about. We provided a cost estimate that was a range. We're still working on getting some more revised specific cost estimates around those different options and what that might do. Their operating costs impact, obviously, related to where, how many pre-K sites.
Would it be a renovated Ludlow or is Ludlow still a knockdown sort of?
You know, we haven't really talked much about that yet. The words we've used so far have been really around renovating Ludlow in line with our other elementary buildings. But I mean, I think you do bring up an interesting point that it's not in great shape.
Right, yeah, the concern that was the worst shape of the buildings, it might be might be over the line.
Yeah, yeah, that's something that we'll come up with more about. The estimates we came up with were just ranges based on estimates we've gotten. From the other-
What's the capacity of Little compared to Fernway or Alloway or?
So correct me if I'm wrong, I think it has about the same square footage as Boulevard, more or less. It has, based on the footprint, and we're gonna learn a little more about this, we believe it has about 25 classrooms. I mean, how much of that, for pre-K space, there are some changes we have to make, or restroom and things like that.
What's our commitment with the program? Is there now that program?
We're in conversation with them. They do have a lease that actually I think expired this year. This year. They are in the process of doing some of their own strategic and facility planning. So we're in regular contact with them. I think they have some decisions to make also, in addition to the decisions that we're making. We've kept them abreast of the.
But they're pretty pleased being there, I think, over the last 25
They
years.
are.
20 years. Yeah.
They have seen declining enrollment as well. I mean, it kind of, public school enrollment's declined, F enrollment has declined. So I think they are making some decisions around what buildings and sites they want to have open in the future. That they're talking about probably more or less as we speak.
Just to give you an idea, Fernway is 36,224 square feet. Ludlow is 38,460. Boulevard's 40.
Okay.
So
Cleaner. Yeah. It's more to the Fernway side, which I thought, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So the last two are pretty self-explanatory, but building a new high school and high school campus area, renovating would vary with additions to create the 6 to 8. Just building on other elements that we are continuing to learn more about. What we did not talk about with the board at the meeting last week was around segmenting. And my hope for our conversation this evening is that we're able to have a discussion around segmenting. We have some numbers that we think will be helpful for this group to have a first glance at. And also think about the next board meeting we'll be having around facilities on January 31st. So this is an initial plan for the numbers. What do we need to add? What's missing? What do we need to share or present as we think about the segmenting decision point? Yeah.
So good, great for the segmenting discussion, because I didn't get that sense that was still on the table based off of the January 9th video. The other side of the discussion is in the agenda, there were these topics of discussion. The word lean used a lot. Leaning this way and that way, but I just want to make sure, wanted to understand that, especially one thing I haven't seen a lot of data on pre-K capital and operating costs. That was interesting. So really, is the attention to get into that tonight?
I don't think we're prepared to tonight, but we are aware that it's a question that we need to have more information around. It's partly related to the site or sites of pre-K. So operating expenses for pre-K may differ pretty substantially depending on if it's at 1 site, 2 sites, 3 sites, 4 sites, or 5 sites. And how many students we think we can accommodate at each of those different sites. We are trying to get a little more information, and we talked about this a little before last week. Transportation, both what is possible, feasible, and how much might that cost. Tuition, sliding scale, no tuition, what are the different kind of variables that go into that? Obviously, that also has an impact on the ongoing operating costs of pre-K, but that we're very aware that that is something that we expect to have this.
What about teachers, like they would be on the same teacher program as current? So it's pretty different than traditional pre-K.
Right.
Teacher.
Well, our current pre-K are
Yeah.
just like regular teachers, they're on the same contract.
That's only
That's not-
selected.
Five, I think, 5 or 6.
Off the top of my head.
Yeah.
You're right that in many other pre-K programs, the licensure requirements may not be as high as ours because they're really few.
Yeah.
So, but in the estimates we've done so far related to pre-K operating expenses. We've accounted for the fact that they are paid, yeah, considered.
Yeah, I do have some information. We analyzed what the existing preschool costs are. We currently have 25 full-day students, 31 half-day students, and another 19 half-day students. So really 50 half-day students. And of that 75 total, that equates to about 50 FTE students if you, 2 halves make a whole. And of the 75, 27 are on IEPs, which, as you may recall, the pre-K program for students with IEPs, there's no charge for half day. So part of the analysis was to get an idea of what we're currently spending on the pre-K program that we do have. And the annualized cost, and again, this is not including building costs, if you will, I guess, it's just teaching costs effectively and paraprofessional costs. And it's about $1 million a year.
That's
And
not
so-
including transportation of that either.
and we only transport these special needs children. Which comes out to about 20,000 per FTE student. Again, that's not even including the operational, building operation.
So that's pretty variable, right? Like you can
It
see all
is.
that. The one with students and stuff.
The only thing I think we can't totally do is knowing the percentage of people on IEPs. Because right now it presumably that percentage will go down. But I mean, certainly from like a rough, yeah, I do wonder if this is a place that we should be having the committee help us run some like different scenarios. Because it seems like we don't know what the full answer is, but we could run some models to see, and I think that'd be really helpful for the board to know basically whether we're gonna have to go after it or not.
We see most of those kids so far go to Shaker schools and for elementary. Like, are we,
The
I'm just
pre-K
curious, are we
kids.
providing free pre-K and then watch them go somewhere else?
No, they, the vast majority of them, including Shaker, I think we have that number, I don't have it off the top of my head, but that's.
There's these other places we can find that information too, so. I mean, obviously CMSC is not that helpful in terms of like, it's a very different system and there's different options for people to go to, but. I've got to say that there's other places that are doing universal pre-K that you can find out what's the average percentage of stay.
I don't know if it's a suggested.
Yeah, typically it's just either special needs. And in some cases, it may be just the low income, for example, that are eligible for Head Start funding.
We're trying to figure out that, I'm trying to figure out that answer if there is a district that's doing what we're suggesting. I know we talked a little bit about how many districts of the ones that have, all have some kind of special ed pre-K program. If there's anything beyond that, are they doing centralized space or decentralized space? Most that I'm familiar with do have some kind of centralized space. There are probably exceptions to that rule, but we're still working on trying to find out more.
Okay, so I guess you want to go into the.
Yeah, that would be just for moving on,
Yeah.
trying to figure out a way that this committee may be able to help do some modeling around pre-K.
Right. Okay,
How does that usually work? Like, is there someone that volunteers or does that happen after where we like thank somebody that?
Whoever's not here that week gets the time.
Yeah, so I hope you're gonna be working on it. Put down the notes. No, but seriously, like,
Usually you and Emmitt tell Bryan and Bryan
okay,
to form a subcommittee.
Brian, we should form myself.
Duly noted.
One more question. This may come out in the modeling piece, but I'm curious, like, is a part-time student half as much as a full-time student? I have to assume there's some fixed costs that are there regardless of whether they're half or full-time, and then the costs associated with a student with an IEP versus a student without an IEP. Because to your point, like, if you could assume on a broader basis, the percentage is going to be more reflective of what we see in the kindergarten class, which I assume is not 50% of students have an IEP. That might make a difference too. So just as you're thinking about the costs, like, you're gonna need some granularity around it.
Yeah, and, you know, Superintendent alluded to, we've kind of done some back of the envelope types of analysis and included some of that. And certainly you do get some more greater economies of scale, but there are so many variables in that equation. And so that's kind of what would be helpful for the committee to kind of help steer that process, come up with various alternates, you know, because there's a full day or a half day. Obviously, some of the costs that, for example, the facility cost might be the same, because if you have a half day, you would need some kind of probably daycare or latchkey program for the students for the other half day. So you still need the facility space. But certainly your teaching costs wouldn't be as high, if they wouldn't need to be certified teachers in charge of the latchkey program, for example. So you do get some, and to your point about not having 50% of the kids on IEPs. I think in our general population,
So just up to 20%.
yeah. And I think statewide it's like 14% maybe or something, big special needs students. So, and
Which it would make, I mean, we're higher now than we typically are in our pre-K program. A lot of pre-K programs are seeing that after the pandemic, more students qualify for special education services. As the pre-K program as it currently exists is partly designed to serve special education students. So it's not unusual that we have a higher percentage of pre-K than elsewhere. Because it's not reflective of our school population.
all right, so we'll get the committee.
There's also some stuff on full versus half day. There's definitely what their teachers were talking about was nap time. So there was some stuff of that, but I assume meals might come into this too. Like there's some other.
There is, and again, that's where it gets pretty complex. One of the things that we've also been talking about is currently we offer options. Some people can choose to go half day, some go full day. Ideally, any pre-K program we offer would continue to provide options for families. We're not locking all families into a half day program, we're not locking families into a full day program. The options and having some kind of extended care program being part of that.
Okay.
So
So,
before we jump into the
Yeah.
document, Brad, I just want to, because we're already talking about pre-K. I want to highlight row 15 in this document says plus pre-K renovation costs. I mean, Joe, to your point about where we include. Right now, the town going with pre-K, we don't yet know. This is talking about capital improvement costs. It's not talking about operating costs.
Who I checking in on you, Bryan?
my wife is.
Any pre-K capital improvement costs would be an LFI, would be added to whatever numbers we come up with. So right now it's a placeholder. As we refine those numbers, we can move it around in the spreadsheet, but we just don't have the numbers. That's why it's included.
So join Christman's iPad.
No, all right.
before you get into too far into any number on here, I assume you'll explain the difference between E, F, G, and H.
We,
What the columns.
Yes. So, part of the, and I don't know, maybe I pull up the board presentation to go over the plan in total first, yeah. So.
Slide, 12, and 15.
Jeff, do you want to start off? Just what they explained the four different scenarios, the difference in that.
Okay, so on that. Plan 1A was the K-5 buildings renovated, so you'll see that is consistent across all the plans. 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. When you look at the 6 through 8 building, it shows in that 1A renovated K-5s, a new 6-8 and a renovated high school. Plan 1B is renovated all of our buildings, K-5, the 6, 7, 8 building on the Woodbury site, and the high school. And below that, obviously, you see the estimated total cost. Plan 2A is the same renovated of the K-5 elementary buildings, the 4 of them, not including Fernway, a new 6-8 building, and a new high school. And then Plan 2B, renovate the K-5, renovated 6-8 building, and a new high school. What I found interesting as we began to look at the numbers, really the estimated district cost doesn't change a lot, which I found, pretty interesting as you go through each of the scenarios. Really, I think the big difference in the estimated OFCC contribution, Bryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but a new building, we're building a new building to fit the student enrollment. So the square footage of the new building.
It's cutting the high school.
For the high school.
I'm sorry, for the high school, right? So you're looking at 240,000 square foot building as opposed to 320,000. So that's really the biggest difference in the OFCC piece.
Hey, Jeff, one thing I've read on various sites where people are making comments and things that came up after this was that this just excludes costs, right? And you do have a footnote that mentions it includes one pool, and it doesn't include pre-K, which you noted, or swing space. Like, are there other things? So it's sort of relocation of the athletic facilities that's in there, and sort of anything else that might have to happen. Do we have an order of magnitude estimate on what that is? Because I'm very concerned that we show these numbers and say, oh, but there's 20 more million, let's take pre-K out of it. I understand that's an estimate that's coming, but like all the other stuff, right? And maybe each one individually is not big, but if it adds up to a substantial amount of money, that's where these comments about, like, it seems like things are being done behind closed doors or it's shifty. And I think that's part of it. Like, we may not know those numbers, but the footnote, I think there's other things that are not included, right?
And the answer
be clear on
that, included in the numbers is the gymnasiums, for example, in the high school. It does include the auditorium in those numbers. Really, the only thing we don't have in the numbers basically is the football stadium and track. And the reason for that is if it's a renovated building, we wouldn't have those numbers in it. And we've even looked at, possible renderings of a new building to where the back of the new building would fit up against the visitor stands of the stadium. So in that scenario, we don't necessarily would need to build a brand new stadium. Once an architect would be on board, to try to help us to see how we can separate the building from the home stands, that sort of thing. So there are some costs that would be associated with a stadium, but that's really the only cost I believe that really does not appear on there because we just don't know where that's gonna go.
So this includes the escalations that we've been seeing from building. Also, the other thing I thought of to Anita's points when looking at comments was, are all the shakerizing costs in here?
They are, and Bryan, doing his job as a treasurer. So he's even taking the Gilbane costs and increase those. So we're on the high end of any costs you see.
But then you average building with those.
We did average with the OFCC.
Yeah, and what you'll find, what we found, which was surprising, the both, we were on a call with OFCC and Gilbane. And their costs in a lot of areas were not far off.
Yeah,
All in, like what is, so if, let's take the first number at 260 million, like what are the two endpoints of those that are numbers about?
you're asking like, what is the total from Gilbane?
Yeah, is it like 200 million and 320 million, or is it 270 or 280? Like, I'm just curious, an average can be.
Somewhere in between there.
Yeah, I just, those are the types of things, I mean.
Yeah, they catch it.
They catch you, and you got to establish trust, and to the extent people feel like, oh, they're gonna hit us with more numbers. Even acknowledging, like that comment you just made about the stadiums, I don't know that I'd heard that, and if it was said, I did actually watch most of that meeting on the 9th, but if that was said there, I missed it. I think it's important to say, no, this isn't in here, here's why, and here's what we'll have to do to get to the point that we know what it is, and maybe it's not worth having a placeholder, or maybe it is. Maybe it's doing a new stadium isn't that much money that it doesn't change things. I don't know, for the stadium costs, but
And how does it compare to
just acknowledging that those concerns are out there and addressing them, I think is important.
Especially when you haven't raised the operating levy yet. And then part of the, just kind of seeing the whole picture, we haven't addressed how much of the cash balances are being applied here, how it's being addressed. The whole picture is live.
Well, and we're gonna have more operational issues with middle schoolers and fields and athletics. And, I was even thinking about if you're transporting 100 middle schoolers over somewhere else every single day, what's their restrooms, what's their safety, what's their building, is there something else that they have that they can use?
What I think is the plan becomes more refined. There's an option that, let's say, your baseball field and your softball field for the high school is on the old middle school site. Right, we have high schoolers that go, to a different place for softball, for hockey.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's the high school students that are traveling to the new fields, and the middle school students are using fields on the campus.
It doesn't.
Regular, you need a new field, and you need restrooms, and you need a safety plan, and you need buses, and you need, right, like a lot more than just like a green space.
I even wonder, like, I just think of like when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, oh, I have so many things in my head, and I just have to write them down, and then you can like actually go back to sleep after. Like, it almost feels like to this trust issue, like we just need to get. It shouldn't just be like, oh, someone mentioned it and they were like, oh yeah, no, we thought about it, because I don't think that's helping to build the trust.
Yeah.
If we could be saying, we don't have all the numbers on it yet, but here are all of the other things that we're thinking about and around magnitude, because my guess is swing space would be very, very costly. And so we don't have what that number is, and my guess is that it would offset but either way, it feels like let's have those. Even if you don't have all of them, to just say like, and here is all things, it almost makes me think of like Gilbane's like list on the side of that spreadsheet that had like, and here's the things that we were looking at that just. It created a little bit more ease to be like, okay, I'm not trying to come up with this every time.
Yeah.
So to answer your question about what's the, spread, if you will. I did an analysis, we did both the higher of the two. In some cases, OFCC was higher, or included numbers, for example, demolition costs, for example. But they didn't have the pool, for example. $11 million pool. So the higher of the two numbers, as opposed to, so for Plan 1A, we have the estimated total cost of 259.9 was kind of the average of the two. The higher of each, the Gilbane or OFCC, was 272. So it wasn't a real big difference in total. On 1B, the higher was 263. Again, about 10 million. The higher for 2A was 287, so that's a little bit difference. And I think a big part of that was at the high school level. And then 2B was 277, so about 20 million difference.
Really the 40 million.
Given the average.
Versus the 255.
Yeah,
No,
but then the.
To average, it's a 20, if you're high, you only have 2 data points, so really a 40 million.
True.
Why is there a different OFCC contribution for 1 and 2?
With Plan 2A and 2B, the distinction, the difference is the high school is new instead of renovated. So it's back to what we're saying is we're shrinking, we build new, we're shrinking the size of that building and renovating to a smaller size, but it's more costly. And therefore the state will, because we're fixing it to the right size, or building it to the right size, the state contributes more of the cost. Even though the percentage stays the same, if it's renovated, they have to allocate out and say, okay, well, we're only gonna co-fund 2/3 of the whole building because it's too big of a building, or 3/4, whatever the percentage is. And so everything over that is LFI, locally funded. And therefore their number at 37% is much smaller on a high school for a renovation than it is if we built new.
Right, there was a comment at the last board meeting, about the potential of not getting the OFCC funding. Can you comment on that?
Jeff?
I did, we have had a couple conversations. Recently, made public comments. I've also had conversations with the FCC. Bill Presley, who's running the program. He is more than willing to have a conversation about those comments made, because I will say he's not in agreement with the comments that were made. And I think it will be best for them to have a conversation together.
You mean the person who made the, I don't remember.
Congressman Bill.
A lot of people heard that statement, is all I would say, so I would not limit that conversation to people.
Well, I mean, they need to have a conversation so he understands.
That's
it
true.
from Bill.
I'm just saying,
After that, you can share with the community. But our understanding is, we are in that system, we are in front. When the funding is available. That has not changed from your comments to us from.
I keep managing those types of conversations, and the question, and I know we don't respond to public comments in the board meeting, but it was left out there hanging, and then there's no follow-up and there's no response, and a lot of people hear it, and I was starting to settle into their brain, like, wow, we're gonna do all of this, and we may not get any of that money in that line, and I think it's a really important point that needs to be addressed, probably sooner than later, too, even if you don't have the final answer to explain. I know it's a very nuanced topic, but there's got to be at least a few talking points to help.
And we would
Adjust
share
all
our
that.
understanding again.
Yeah.
Is it possible to have the OCD person come to the board meeting, Jeff?
He's done that in the past, I mean. It's a possibility.
Yeah, I don't know what the right way to do it is. I was watching it and I thought, wow, that's a really powerful statement. I'm on finance and audit, and I'm not even sure if I'm like, I don't know if that's right or not, like. how to
Yeah,
address
our
that.
understanding is that.
Okay. And I guess our next board meeting is the 31st. And I think I'm wondering too, if Steve Barrett was using the delay, the OCC commission thing too. But
Well,
it didn't sound that way.
A piece of that, would be to the OFCC, the is not if they're funding dollar amount and the source. I mean, they are convinced that they continue to get the dollar amounts put aside for facilities, but they can't set that aside ahead of the budgeting process. So to say, is the money available right now? Are they budgeted for that? No. Do they budget for it every year? Yes. Do they anticipate that budget changing? No.
So let's play this out. I'm just interested. What happens if we go to the ballot, pass the levy? And then
Hasn't happened for this.
no, never. Are we obligated to still then issue or like enact the levy?
No.
I don't think so.
I guess I don't know.
We also have, I mean, we have documents with OCC.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's my understanding, that we can do the process before.
I think Brian, if we pass a bond, we can opt not to levy the tax. Right. We just have the option.
This is the option to do it.
Right.
Yeah, in fact, if we don't issue the bonds, the county budget commission would not levy that.
Okay.
For example, we can also issue part of the levy at a time.
Right.
That's the.
It's not to do it all at one time.
Yeah, you probably would not,
30 million.
right? Because of the spend down requirements.
Correct.
You can't spend 190 million all at once.
Yeah, I more meant like we passed something that was gonna do $260 million worth of good to the district, but really.
Never mind that without.
Right,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then I maybe would have voted differently had I known that. So, but it looks
Correct.
like that is not a likely scenario, and also we could reconsider our options.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, so then the next page of this was the same scenarios, taking that estimated net district cost. Then what the amount that could be funded via bonds, the maximum that we could issue in bonds. And then that's where we're talking about other funding sources needed, like what we call COPS, COPS, certificates of participation. It's basically a lease debt. So that under scenarios 1A and 1B, there would be that COPS needed in addition to the maximum funding that we can get from bonds. But under plan 2A and 2B, we don't. And again, the distinction becomes the high school is the factor that's coming into play. So then the next line down, the estimated net millage. And again, this is to the amount of bonds that we're able to issue, not the total cost. Because the COPS would have to be funded either out of the general fund or out of our existing permanent improvement fund.
So just some higher amount.
Again,
It would be a higher amount on the taxpayers than what you're showing here.
well, the amount of the bonds, the millage is just for the bonds, correct? The other funding sources would have to be either funded from your general fund,
Correct.
which obviously then puts pressure on your general fund and your operating levy. And or through the existing PI levy, which is an obligation upon the taxpayers. And that is currently, that's a 1.25 stated mills, and it's down to around 1.1, 1.0 mills right now effective. But at any rate, so the estimated net millage for a bond issue would be those numbers, 8.28 in scenarios 1A and 1B, 8.64 in 2A, 8.36 in 2B. And then what the estimated annual cost for $100,000 home, and there's numbers there. Go ahead.
Just a confirmatory question.
Yeah.
One of those simple questions asked that you understand you want an answer. So if I go to the auditor's website and I see two numbers, I see an assessed value of my home and I see a market value of my home. Which one of those numbers do I divide by 100,000 and then multiply by that?
Market.
You're right. But you often say, oh, for assessed value, you're looking at the assessed, because it wasn't the billion, the assessed.
That is.
Yeah, so that's why I think the market value is different.
Yeah. market value is, I typically
The
not.
assessed value to go up by 6.2% to get to the billion, but that's not related to the math you do as an individual person here to figure out how much my cash is on the door.
Correct. And I believe that we shared, we were able to obtain what the median and the mean, the average home value in Shaper, not based on the selling prices of properties that have been sold in the last 6 months, but on the appraised value that's on the tax rolls, right? And I believe the median was about 255. The mean was a little higher, like 280.
So Brian, when you do that, when you get away from the millage and things like that, that the average taxpayer and the average person like me doesn't always understand, what percent increase is this? When it comes down to, what are you talking about in terms of taxes? Is it a 5% increase, 10% increase? I have my own calculation, I just want to see if you can.
Well, tell me what you can.
No, I want to hear from you.
The first question is percentage of just the school district portion of the tax or the total tax to the property?
You're asking, right?
Total tax. It's going to have my total taxes.
So the, let's see here, I'm trying to think. Yeah. Document here, if I can show it.
You're looking for this thing, right here.
The, that was actually the other one. You've got it printed out there. I'll take it from Marty. One of the attachments tonight is the assessed millage and assessed value.
Right.
And actually, that's not.
This one?
Here we go.
Yeah.
The one that's called the tax allocation chart, residential effective yield. That's one of the attachments to section 2.3. Yeah, this is
So order of magnitude.
yeah.
I mean, we need to know these things.
Yep. There we go.
Yeah, like if I have a house that the market value is $100,000 today, how much do I pay? That's a simple answer, like,
Right. I keep doing it on a basis of 100,000, like you did.
if my market value is 100,000, Brian, what do I
When you
pay today?
multiply it by whatever your home value is.
So 100,000 market value home for Plan 1A
No, not
8.3.
for really one day.
Right now, I pay $10,000 of taxes. I will pay how much after this plan if that's on 100,000 or 200,000?
So the total effective mills.
Not bills,
This
Brian,
is the
dollars.
inside baseball.
Okay.
Okay.
Because I don't have the information here. I'm going to be able to calculate it for this. The total effective mills, residential shaker is for residential, not commercial. And for the tax collection year 2023 is 120.41.
Right.
So if we raise I'm just going to use 8.5 mils, different numbers across different scenarios. 8.5 divided by 120.4 is 7.1% increase.
Okay. I'd come up with 8, so I'll give you that. On that house.
But this is probably just school district, right? So you're looking
No, that's 120 is all.
Okay.
That includes
Everybody.
everybody. So it's a greater percentage, obviously, on the school district only.
But we're talking about.
But we're talking about the total.
Dollars out the door, make it.
That we get every January and every
Yep.
July, look
Exactly.
forward to it, right? Yep.
So currently, that 120.41 mils and your home costs 100 is market value of 100,000, Anita, that's your
On the
question?
website.
Okay. So the tax bill, including everything, for a $100,000 home on 120.41 mils is $4,214 a year.
And they're running 290 on top of that. In a scenario 1A.
Correct.
So
if you have a $300,000 home, it's $290 is $900. And it's about 8%. 7-8%.
And 290 divided by that
But-
4,200
But
is.
that's only the building costs we're talking about here. It's not operating cost, it's not the unknowns, it's not swing space, it's not the operating in pre-K, so on and so forth.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
That was helpful.
But
It's not a facility,
That
pre-K
number
either.
you came up with.
Is it?
No, it's not facility.
Very cool. About 8%.
I had 8.1.
It could even be higher, but that's if you add in the other implications of a tax, operating cost levy, other things we don't know about, swing space. 5 to 10% conservatively for unknowns. You can get up to 9%.
Yes, although, I mean, I do want to point out that we are gonna add a debt limit issue.
Right.
So the bond issue,
Well, then it's funded through other things. It's
Right.
funded through
some of
operating.
which we would need an
Somewhere,
opportunity for, some of
yes.
which we.
I mean,
Right.
it's not inconceivable that 5 or 10% of the cost could come from operating easily. Right, which just is another
Plus
burden.
you add the sensitivity, you're using 5%.
Right.
You get 1.8 million a year in service for every 1% that moves up. So
So Brian, your number was 7.1%.
7.1, yeah. Yeah, and that's why I raised it from previous presentations. I was using 3.5, 4, 4.5, and I moved it up. I just said, I'm not gonna waste that time. I said, move it up to 5%. And I'm meeting with our underwriter here soon, that getting a better feel for where it is right now.
I think the point is, again, is you're moving to, you gotta take a decision and start building trust and selling the story.
Right.
And the issue is being really transparent on where the rest of the money comes from. Right, and because COPS funding sources, where does COPS money come from? And how does it get paid off? At the end of the day, it gets paid off about sounds like the general fund. So we have to be cautious about that. And I also, some of us have long memories where you told me the P&I was necessary for warm, safe, and dry, and now you're going to reallocate it to. I thought that, be careful saying that's going to service COPS instead of saying keep our buildings in good shape over the next 37 years while you're financing this deal. So,
Now, yeah, included in that is the $500,000 maintenance that's required under OFCC projects. And again, it's net millage, and I have that footnoted as well. That's, remember, is presumptive of that 1.5 mil dropping off. So what's on
the impact in the first year, maybe that's where my extra potential.
well, and the impact to the ballot language. You can't put net millage on the ballot language.
I think Bryan will says, should we talk about cost, we also talk about savings. Closing of a middle school. Some point, we're gonna have to, we're gonna have to have those costs.
And we do.
Right, to say, yes, we need $1 million a year to fund preschool. But we're gonna save them, I mean, I'm just.
Right.
But we're gonna save $1 million a year by
Or closing one of the buildings.
closing one building.
Probably gonna have
It's our second largest building, just,
And I believe we had that on,
yeah.
if it wasn't the last meeting, before that, on the FNA agenda. Okay. So does that help clarify your original question, Trent, about what the different scenarios mean?
No, because I was actually asking about the scenarios on your spreadsheet.
Segmenting scenario.
Well, so they tie in directly to this, so that's why I wanted to go over this first.
That part I got.
Okay.
From your video.
Okay,
So this is the new document.
this is the new document, which I've handed out.
Except right on your hand, you don't have line 15, right?
I know.
It just says.
Oh, let's be on
Okay. So then starting with 1A, trying to explain what this sheet does. Again, this is the same 1A as what we just looked at on the board agenda. The full plan is this column here. So those numbers should tie right into the PowerPoint presentation. So then what we've done is I've created two segment scenarios. And I didn't use A or B again to avoid confusion, so I used X and Y. And so under segment X scenario, you have segment 1 and segment 2. So I have X1 and X2. And under this,
So X1 would be what you would do first, and 2 is what
Correct.
you do next, okay?
so segment X1 is the K to 8 buildings. Segment X2 is the 9 to 12 buildings.
Gotcha.
Okay,
So elementary and middle years wait on the high school, and then Y is middle years in high school wait on the elementary.
exactly.
Got it.
So the way that the numbers work out is in general, they usually will add up to the total. And that may not be appropriate, depending upon how long there is a time frame between segment 1 and segment 2. But to keep things on an even keel, everything else being equal in essence, we've split the two that way. So there's no accounting for further escalation costs and the construction costs or whatever it would be for segment 2. So
Is that, I mean, is that
Yeah.
a fair assumption to make? Do you, I mean,
It's definitely not.
I mean, I just think this really understates the true cost of segmenting if you're not going to include those.
Well, it does if your segment is more than 1 or 3 years, because you have like a 5-6 year build it all plan anyway.
correct.
So.
Yeah.
But
it's a fair point.
realistically, we're not going after a levy, like that would be a bond levy, an operating levy, a bond levy. Oh,
But you gotta pick a number then, that's what I can do.
yeah.
Yeah.
that's a good point.
So, the same process or same calculations apply as what was on the board presentation. So we have the estimated total cost, that's simply split between K to 8, 9 to 12, 6 to 12 versus K to 5. The estimated OFCC contribution is simply split per the building. In other words, each building has how the state calculates their share. So the assumption is that they would, in fact, however you segment whatever their share of the state money for that building is, that's what we would get. So obviously, depending on which ones you do first, how that breaks down cost wise. And I will say that we have the K to 8 in segment X1, 6 to 12 is segment Y1, with the notion that we really probably have to include the middle school program building in the first segment to allow for swing space. Okay, because we're going to either need the middle school or Woodbury or both in the calculation of how we do swing space for no matter which program we do. So that was the rationale for putting the middle year program in the first segment in X and also in this first segment for Y. So that's why they appear to be reversed.
Bryan, taking
Mhm.
out of, taking that financial estimation out of it, is it reasonable to think the sum of the parts is exactly equal to whole, or will we expect to be segmented if the two combined would cost more than the total if we were doing it all at once?
So, and part of the calculation comes out with the maximum bond amount does change slightly. So the details don't necessarily all add up to the
I
total.
guess I meant more the cost. Like, are there things that if you were doing K through 12 all at once, you'd only incur once, but because you're segmenting it, you incur twice, and that's going to also cost more?
Where you get better prices because the scale is so much larger.
Yeah, I'm just curious if it's really, you may not have the answer, just something to think about.
Yeah.
Like, I want to make sure that if we're going to look at a segmented, we really understand the financial implications of doing it. It's not just dividing the number in half and doing it at 2 different times. If it's really, it's going to be 10% more, 25% more to segment it, that's got to be taken into
Is that something
consideration.
that
Well, you have to look at all the variables,
So we
maybe
probably-
start of the project,
Yeah.
5 years or 7 years, whatever number you tell them.
You know,
But it-
I just have to pick a number, like, we're gonna, segment 2 will happen 10 years from now.
The thing is, they're hard to know numbers.
Yeah.
Growth in assessed value versus inflation of construction, and, you know, but it's a fair, I agree with the question. But it's hard enough to project 3 years, let alone 7 to 10.
But also complicated, like if we're talking about 10 years and we do segment X1 of K8. And the high school needs $10 million over the 10 years, you know, like there's also values to it too.
Yes.
Yeah, you gotta keep them safe and dry, whatever is in segment.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk with segmenting.
Because presumably this could all, I mean, this, we are gonna sequence it no matter what, right? We're not actually gonna do K-12 in 1 year, so. There's still gonna be.
That would be the cost higher.
Yeah. And a lot of gray hairs, but I don't know, like, I think that there's, they're already making estimations on what the escalation is for what's happening in about 3 years from now. It feels like they should be able to give us those numbers for 10 years.
Yeah, and I think they have assumptions on how much they escalate in a year. And Jeff, do you know how many years did they escalate out? Is it 27 or 26?
I thought it was 26, 27.
Yeah.
But there are other factors for segmenting besides like getting a levy passed.
Well, and that becomes the first hurdle is passing another levy.
Or passing the first level.
Well, the assumption is the first one passes, since we're looking at segment 2, but yes, you're correct. But the idea of segmenting obviously is to mitigate somewhat the sticker shock, if you will, of the total package at once.
Yeah. Well, also you could argue that if you segment, you gain credibility by proving the concept works. That there are educational improvements coming from better buildings, more efficient buildings, pre-K, etc. And then after you prove the concept and gain credibility, which is a real challenge today in the community.
Yeah.
Then we go for the next 100 million for the high school, which might be 3, 5, 7 years later. I know that nobody likes that idea, but it's not going to be next week. It's going to be a while later.
Right.
So you prove the concept first, and you eliminate some of the sticker shock.
Create some option.
And you create some optimism that.
Option value.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
I guess
There's a lot of other things you don't know. You know, adoption rate of pre-K, what's going to happen to the enrollment, what's going to happen to the community, what initiatives are required.
Are you suggesting even a smaller segment 1?
Well, let's not get into that
Okay.
at this point. I mean, I'm just thinking about why you would want a segment. From my viewpoint, you want to prove that the concept is viable, works, is good for the community. More importantly, is better for our students. We have measurable results to show that. Then you have credibility to go out for the second piece. The home run is high school, I guess.
Okay. So as we point out, plus pre-K renovation is to be determined.
No, Marty, I mean, just to respond to that, I mean, I think there are merits to that. I think a challenge could be, I mean, it may or may not be easy to prove the success, and how long do we wait for that? So
I
let's
understand.
just say it takes 8 years to do the first segment, whatever. the
But,
first segment
we're
is.
talking about something that is 6 times larger than anything we've ever done in Shaker Heights. 6 times, 6x.
Remember last time Dr. Gurley asked us all to go around the room.
Yeah.
I didn't have a chance to. It was full. So I think we just.
You know?
It's not, it was.
Yeah.
So as I recall, and I can pull my notes, they're upstairs, unfortunately. I thought the predominance was the full Monty, so to speak.
That was the majority, but not the
Majority, not unanimous. Correct.
I do
Was
think-
that last
Last meeting.
I'm sorry, it wasn't you.
No.
I had that conflict with the city.
No problem.
budget process.
Marty, I do think I mean, one of the reasons why we want to show these numbers, I know we focus, the question of like how accurate are our numbers, especially related to 72. In some ways,
It's like my forecast. The number will be
but
wrong.
in some ways, I think segment 1 might be the more important number to look at, because that's
First
the
sale.
first, right? I mean, one reason it's a segment is reduce sticker shock, right? Right now, we're asking people, I don't remember, to go for 6 mils or 5 mil, whatever it is, instead of 8 mils, or 8.5 mils. So. Yeah, and those numbers presumably are more accurate with the second segment.
I think also, if we compare back to the $30 million bond issue was 2.5 mils.
See, we
And we're talking 4 times the millage, but
2.5 with the,
no,
yeah, just.
no, just, or just the bonds, I'm sorry, not the PI, correct, not but
See, we're talking about a long-range facility planning update, but really the way I read the administration and the board is this is a one-shot deal for $200 million, $190 million, whatever you want, $176 million, $183 million, whatever scenario you go at. It's not long range, it's a one-shot deal. Give me the whole thing now and trust me, you'll be better tomorrow. I think that's a tough nut to sell for everybody. I mean,
I think it's, but like the opposite of it is so much more than we've ever spent on our buildings,
yeah,
and we're now gonna have to pay for it. Right, like I think there is some part of it of like, we haven't been investing in our buildings at the rate that we should have been to not be
people
here.
personalize it. They put it in their home value where they haven't invested, they haven't built a new kitchen, they haven't built the addition, they haven't done this, done that. Think back to where you were in 4th grade, where you were in 7th grade, where you were in 9th grade. Somehow you got through those buildings, and that was probably one of the lesser ingredients to your success. I would argue that it was a tiny part of your success, your ultimate success. And I think that's a tough nut to sell to people.
Yeah, but I talked to some of my peers and they say, but I made it through those buildings.
That's what I'm
The
saying.
exact same way they are today,
That's what I'm
right? Like,
saying.
the buildings have not
They're actually
changed
not the
since
same.
my peers, literally my neighbors were students here.
No, that's what I'm saying.
But now, you should have later and not paying us paid, like, they're just worse, they're just degrading. We haven't done anything.
We're not, the segmentation is no facilities plan. That's not, it's not just, it's not clarified zone.
Yeah.
The only, the other thing that's on, in my mind, and to what I think my version of my interpretation of the credibility and see where we're going. In my opinion, the other thing that we haven't invested in is not just our facilities, but we haven't invested enough in our educational outcomes in our children, specifically our teachers. And therefore, I expect to see a big millage coming. I would love to see some investment in the classroom, not just the classroom. So I think that is part of what the other part, what am I getting for this money? And that's where you run into some of the kind of stuff. So I get part of my concern when I voted for segmentation and the roundtable was I would like to see here's a big step forward in facilities. And we're also going to invest in the outcome.
I wonder if we behind the story a little bit better in this, because we actually do have a example of investing in a building where we have teachers that are trying to get into those buildings where we.
I'm not saying neither they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah, but I just wonder if there's like, it's not either or of like. We either, like we wait 10 years to show something or we don't, like, we actually do have something that I think is available, but I think the problem is academic outcomes is going to be hard to show in the midst of a nationwide decrease in academic outcomes. But I think there's other things that we could potentially. be-
Yeah, and segment 2 is, as you admitted, 5. And then more
Yeah.
5 or 7. Or,
That is not, I mean, honestly, like,
but the point is, it's down, we won't be able to show academic progress in the time I discount.
no, I mean, honestly, I mean, like, we know pre-K will have the academic progress. There's like certain things we know, period, but
Pre-K isn't in these numbers, but understand.
But I just wonder if like. What I'm hearing from you is like, there's, what is the ability for community members to say, okay to this? Because my guess is, to your point, Anita, the numbers on segmenting are gonna be ugly, right? Like, as we continue to add in what we believe are gonna be the escalation cost of this. That picture is gonna get less rosy from the dollar amount, so really it's about. Trust from the community, to what extent are they gonna get behind it, and I don't know, I don't think we're particularly good at touting the like, these are the good things that are happening, and the fact that, and to your point of like investing in teachers, like our salaries continue to go up, like there are actual, we're putting in more professional development, there's actually is some real investments that are happening also on that side for sure. And I mean, I got to visit Fernway this weekend, and walking into those rooms, like that, I don't know, there's something that we can be doing, I think, to be taking advantage of this, of like showing the pictures of what Fernway looks like compared to honestly like our other elementary schools look like, what those classrooms are giving, and there might even be some stuff that we could be looking at from an academic standpoint to be able to share in what Fernway's. Even though it is, I mean, they're going to be.
I don't disagree with some of that. I've seen the Fernway videos and even hear the good things about Fernway too, and still hear good things about it. But there's some larger issues. I hear an excuse about the report cards of the schools, the DOE done in Columbus. But be careful saying, vote for this and every building will magically turn into pyramid. I think that would be, I hear you, we could sell the success of an updated facility better than we currently are doing, but I don't think you can say, I'll get you to vote yes in one vote. Fernway turned out great.
I mean, I think people should expect.
No, you talk about outcomes, we're not talking about look like, we're talking about outcomes.
I mean, statistically, if you look at student outcomes and socioeconomic background, they are, I'm not gonna get the right word here of like correlated or causated or whatever, but.
I'm not arguing that,
is
but you're going down a path of saying that's the only reason. Just give us CapEx and everything else will be fine. I don't believe you can do that.
I don't believe ever. I think
I'm sorry, but that's why I just heard you. Maybe I'm not hearing.
No, I'm just saying there's like a story of Fernway that we should be sharing a little bit more broadly. But I don't believe that buildings are a panacea. I also don't believe that classroom size is a panacea. I don't believe, like, if there was a panacea, we would see education get better, right? So, yeah, but I do think like we have seen some real outcomes from, and even like the operating costs of the building, like there's.
If you're fighting, I'd be cheering you on right next to you, Laura, if her choice was do nothing. With do nothing, at least amongst this group, you've been taken off the table.
This is about the segmenting.
Yeah, it's just part of the discussion. And unfortunately, as long as we keep thinking there's going to be one silver bullet, there's not. It's just difference of opinion. You got to pick something and rock it. And I think even if after you properly escalate segment 2 numbers, people are going to still say, I'll take some new buildings now. I can afford that now. I know you're coming with an op levy. Come back to me. I can't afford what you're going to do. And that's an unknowable question. You can't analyze your way to that answer. You have to pick what you're and make your case, and you don't and go with it.
How to that point, how close are you to having a final proposal?
I mean, you saw the like where we're on that
Like
list.
4 or 5. I mean, where are we though? We're not talking about doing nothing, but where are we in terms of what are we going to offer?
I mean, for the full facilities plan, I think we were talking about plan.
2B.
Yeah, 2A.
That's how I read it, but then I think you put all your marbles and start going down that path, and showing why that works, why that's important. What are the educational outcomes? I mean, I think you got to cut to the chase now. We're talking about what, May? Which really means.
Well, November.
March. No, but you gotta go to the.
It's April.
State.
Well,
We have to give the state,
Right.
pencils down, they call it.
I mean, that's right around the corner. And if you're gonna, I don't know where, if you're gonna ask something from the finance and audit committee, my concern is you're gonna come to us 20 days, 5 days, 20 days, 40 days. We all have jobs or other commitments. We're all volunteers. You're gonna ask for something from us that's order of magnitude large. And we have to know that. We have to kind of get into this and understand what you're gonna ask. Maybe you're not gonna ask anything, which is okay. You just can use us as a sounding board for these, spirited Tuesday night meetings, which is fine. But if you're gonna ask for something, we gotta really understand what that is.
Well, I think the pre-K, the ask about pre-K is a significant part of that. That's one of the.
I agree with you, but I think that's more of a community operating requirement. That we step up for the operating cost of universal pre-K. I think we'll figure out the buildings. I mean, I know that's a big deal, but I think I think it's a huge deal, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
If we want to do that, buildings are not secondary, but we are really want to send 4 and 5 year olds to universal pre-K. That's important, that's expensive, and we'll figure out what the building requirements are for that, whether it be Ludlow or whether it be a combination of a bunch of schools, and how many kids are we counting on. We could talk about as many as 600 kids, right? Theoretically.
If you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, could, I don't think it'd be anywhere near that, but it could be. That's a big operating cost and commitment for the community to embrace. And that is one where likely you can actually define educational benefits rather than trust me.
there's tons of research on it.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, but it only benefits the district if they stay in the district.
Well,
Yeah, I know.
Because if
It
we
benefits
move
the
to another
city.
district and we don't have kids going to.
But there's no way.
Move in.
I mean, there's constant movement,
Correct.
volatility in the district, and there's lots of unknowns and.
The point being is if it was universal throughout the state, every district had to have pre-K, then everyone would benefit because no matter where the families moved, kids would have had the experience of pre-K.
That's a risk, but some risks are unknowable and then you can't analyze your way out of it. Nobody else is trying what we're trying. So.
And also-
You're in the vanguard, that's great sometimes.
Also, we feel that, it's kind of like Field of Dreams, build it, they will come. If you offer this program, we feel it will make us a target to attract more.
Yes.
Did you assume that
Now, that
pre-K would
could
be done
be-
in the first segment?
Beg your pardon?
Do you assume, I mean, I know the segment goes in for OCC and things like that, but do you assume the pre-K would also be done as part of the K-8 or the 6 through 12, whatever the first segment is?
To the extent we can include, we have additional bond millage, and in some of these scenarios we do, and others we don't. Any renovation could be included as an LFI.
I mean, it would have to be in Ludlow.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, to that point, you can't say pre-K is the thing that we're really bringing to the community. There's proven educational outcomes to part of segment 2, right? I mean, so you gotta, when I see that TBD line on there, I know that's part of the question is, I mean, I'm looking at this slide, anywhere from 10 to 20 million, if it's at Ludlow and concentrated. Like, can we come up with 20 million? Like legally, can we issue enough debt? And if not, where do we come up with that money? Because I mean, it's a big part of the conversation.
Look at the back of where Joe started. Because the argument of, hey, linking, you must do pre-K in order to make the whole system work. And we went all in on that over the summer, last summer, so that part makes sense to me, so. That's a fair point.
Can you redo these, like pick a number, 15 million for pre-K renovation costs? I understand that's not the operating, but you've got ranges on here, right? You could at least drop a placeholder in and say, pick the midpoint of that, assuming that's 15 million. What does that do? Where does that money come from?
and included inside that fund.
And that's one other thing I'll throw on, I mentioned earlier, but where does the money come from? The other thing that I'm hearing from, you know, the people I usually ignore on these things, but it's a fair question. How much of the general fund balance how much of the cash on hand are you throwing at this and haven't told us yet? You know, because there's people who, some say to the other way, you have $70 million or $80 million or $90 million, why do you need my money? Then there's other folks who say, well, it's really costing a lot more. They're just gonna pay for it directly out of that fund and our rainy day fund is going. Now, I'm not proposing one right way or wrong way, but that total funding picture that you showed, there was a long time ago, where it kind of showed where the money would come from and it was forward together slide. I think you need to start tying that back in too. So that people don't get surprised if suddenly there's $40 million missing from the cash balance.
Well, I think that's what the other funding sources, the COPS.
But I don't think that's ever been very
never been-
clearly stated. Like we keep saying other funding sources or COPS or it's, you know.
Well, I think that's good. In the earlier presentation, that there was a note that it would have to be funded from the general fund and or the PI fund.
But that's, people aren't hearing that. General fund, I hear operating costs. I hear operating levy. I don't hear the cash balance on it.
And we just, it's so tricky, right? Because I feel like the first thing you said about that board meeting was it was inside baseball.
But-
This is
but-
like a whole new level of inside baseball, so like.
We are inside baseball to back out of it, though,
Yeah.
to trust and simplify.
Yeah, and it might be, we have always targeted X% of the surplus. We don't have to use the word surplus for any day fund. We're at Y%, which is substantially higher than we had ever said we needed to be. So that's why it makes sense to spend some of that.
Yeah.
This
And maybe
committee
that fund's
done
pre-paid
work
for
for
5
them.
years of operating costs before we have to come up with another source for it. But that's the way to think about it. And you're right, it is inside baseball, but you can put it in.
Very
Lemons
non-inside trip. Because at the end of the day, the sources, when you use them, pick your label, but we're asking you for this much money, and this is how much other money we're gonna go through. And this is how it's gonna be spent, and it's responsible, and this is the vision that's gonna work. And then we're gonna come back to you for an operating levy, and
Right,
then
because the rainy day fund is keeping us from the operating levy.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I feel like that really, like ultimately, it's like when are we gonna do it? Really. What this is coming down to, right? Like, where we're getting the money from or whatever, like, people wanna know. 9 millage now, what's coming up in 2 years or 3 years or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that, the way you've got it on here, like, here's my monthly cost, and if we layer in an operating levy, like, here's my monthly, like. Show me about it, show me over the next 10 years, or I mean, I know this goes up 37 years, but show me over the next 10 years, if this is the plan. My house is worth 100,000, this is the hit to my pocketbook, right? And here's how it goes up and down, and there's one village drops off and another one comes on, and I know there's unknowns, but we can pick some numbers, make some assumptions that are at least order of magnitude accurate. Show somebody, it's gonna cost you an extra $700 next year, right? If it's $290 and you've got a $300,000 house, and then the operating levy hits, it's another $100 or whatever the number may be. They put it into, and that's what you're, like, is this plan worth that to you?
slightly different question, Brian. Is millage and all this math equal to millage and operating levy math? Meaning if this is 9.36 mils for 290, but this one I think was, you're on 2A.
This is 2B.
Okay. Well, so the 292, but so if you had a 9.9 operating levy, would it be another 290?
Well, this is, you're looking at.
I'm just asking if millage on capital the same as millage on operating?
Yes,
It charges
the millage is applied to your.
Millage is millage, that's what I,
Millage.
that's what I thought, but I got through, but if we ran, if, you know, our last one was 6.9, we did a lot of 9.9s before that, if we did a 9.36 operating levy in 3 years, would it be?
Well,
effectively-
836 is 293. Because.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's an
Oh,
836.
836.
So Ryan, is an 836 operating levy also 293?
Correct.
So that's,
Yeah.
that's not $100 for an operating.
No, I know.
No,
Versus the 700.
No, correct. Susan, you were
But
thinking.
what,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it comes down to like, how many dollars does the district get out of that?
and a long period of time.
Right,
And operating.
because operating levy is much shorter.
Well, operating
No.
levy is continuous.
But you don't get the appreciation of that.
Correct.
Right. It stays. There's a lot of code.
Universal pre-K can be exempted. It just is, and it's not a dance around it, but it's what the community is committed to. And it's not funded by the government, it's funded. Facts. I mean,
I have
unfortunately,
a preschooler where they're paying today to take care of that child. They're 3 and 4 years old.
yeah, I mean, that's.
They're trying to address savings and the proportion of the population.
No, that's kind of, again, if we're helping you with the inside baseball when everybody has the different opinion of
Yeah.
Shaker comes through but when you come through, but at the highest level, again, that kind of, as the benefit of the email, the momentum start with the email, if we're gonna go with this, now we're gonna have to have the funds to do it, including the facilities in which to do it, and the facilities for those pre-Ks to go in and include the whole experience. That's all key and supported part of it. Not necessarily arguing that, but just recognizing the all or nothing plus the universal pre-K plus general operating levy. That's just some, And you're not gonna make everybody happy. The people who sit there, well, when I moved to Shaker, there was a waiting list to be a teacher in Shaker. That kind of stuff. You're not gonna fight those out.
Yeah, I just think there's a strategic piece in this that is about if pre-K is going to be the beginning, which in the first segment, which I think we would feel very strongly that it should be. It is going to push an operating levy faster, which then makes getting the second segment. Like I think there's I don't know what what outcomes people would see that all of a sudden be like, oh no, I'm just thinking
Maybe-
about
Maybe a different way of thinking about it
Yeah.
is. What's the bigger win? Universal pre-K and K through 8? And maybe a new high school someday? Or neither, no universal pre-K, no K through 8.
There's like a security thing that
Okay, you can't have everything. I asked, which would you prefer? Nothing? Potentially nothing versus a large, important. So we can actually help you lay out some of the math behind that, but it's really, it's more of a qualitative argument than a quantitative. You've done the math so much that the quantitatives kind of don't matter as much. In my opinion.
Yeah, I think that, the board has made it clear that we renovate 4 elementary schools. Plus for elementary spot. The board has made it clear that the 6, 7, 8 buildings, very site, or that's renovated. The one thing the board has not made 100% clear, but leaning towards a new high school. I think, listening to what you say about the segmenting, what people can take, right? Or can I be willing to vote yes on? There's 2 choices. It's 6 through 12 buildings and universal preschool. Or it's K through 8 buildings and universal preschool. That's the direction we need to help on. Like, people will talk, do your high school first, it's the flagship, it's what every student that's in school right now will see, unless they're 10th grade, 11th, or 12th grade. I had a long conversation today with 2 very nice gentlemen, talking about, if you start at the elementary, that the reality of it is, none of our families in elementary will experience that.
Right, that's what Susan
That's the reality, you're not gonna experience it.
Different families.
And a ton of residents are gonna experience any of it anyway. I mean, that's the long and short of it, right? I would, the majority of residents will not benefit.
And I think
Personally,
all
for
that.
that.
This group needs to look at, because if you renovate 4 elementary schools. The people that don't have kids in the buildings are never gonna see it. The outside's gonna look identical for the most part.
But but down the elementary schools, Jeff, the one thought to think of between the 6 through the 12. Hey, you're all gonna get to benefit from this, or are we gonna keep pulling in families, young families to keep your home value up by having?
Sure.
That would be the.
And are we gonna
trade off between
families-
which one you do first.
I would say to the point of, we all made it through less than ideal facilities at whatever age we were at, like, is it more meaningful? Like, is it, when are you having, probably, not to say like the die is cast by 9th grade, but I would think that making changes that facilitate educational outcomes at the K-5 level probably has the opportunity to have bigger impact. Like, not discounting what you can do at higher levels too, but I mean, I agree, if you had a pick. I'm sure I'm told I'm pick many, but if you had to pick, I think the younger grade, and to point, yes, my children won't enjoy it, but I will probably sell my house someday, and I think, even people who don't have kids in the school district, I mean, housing values will stay up, right, or raise with those types of things, and certainly universal pre-K as well. I mean, to your point about what do you pay today for it, if that cost comes off of your budget for the people who are paying for it, that's substantial.
I never thought of turn the die is cast. But I would guess, Jim at the high school, I had Woodbury, the die is cast for most kids. Well, before you ever see them, well, before I ever saw them.
Yeah.
That's one different day,
Which is like pre-K, exactly.
which is why you gotta get the whole system.
I mean, I totally agree. There is a money thing of how much money we have for into high school that is.
But you can't have everything.
No, I know, but I mean, I would lean towards then pre-K and then 6 through 12. Yeah, I mean, I just like, they're in the roughest shape and I really like, I do have girlfriends,
Again, but I think that's where the board, 4 months out of the April 6th meeting.
4,
Time
2.5.
2.5, 3.5, whatever. We're attention math, but will help you. But without our personal biases, sorry, to Marty's point. We're good and tight on timing.
Okay. Well, seeing how Marty predicted that 8:30 was a little.
Where's he going? 8:30. Don't buy anybody. It's over by 8:30.
It's now 8:51. But I moved forward to, I guess I want to go back to 1A real quick, just to show that someone asked about, it's not just the sum of the parts equals the total. And for example, in this situation, under the 1A scenario, this is high school renovated, 6 to 8 new, that the bond limitation on the full program, there's a limitation of bonds of only 176 million. And therefore we have a $15 million under funding sources need to bridge the gap to the total cost. That when you split it out into the X segment, that doesn't change much. The total is still the same, the 14.7. But if you segment Y, you end up with an even larger funding source need. Again, it's all predicated on the calculation of the OFCC co-fundable numbers. And because 1A is a renovated high school, that creates the bond limitation that is even bigger than if you did it all at once. I don't know if I explained that very well, but so just to point out that splitting them, there are, besides the cost of escalation, et cetera, that does come into play. So if we then advance to 2B, again, this is the renovated 6 to 8 building. It says renovated, but it's really renovated with an addition for Woodbury. And then high school new, that you get kind of your maximum. There is no, we don't have a bond limitation issue under this scenario. And in fact, I do believe we have some excess capacity available, which then would be eventually possible to include that pre-K program costs, renovation costs. And then coming down to, you know, as we said, all these scenarios had about the same bottom line millage amount. That's not to say that the cost is the same. But because remember in that, for example, that 1A where you already had a other funding source needed beyond the bonds. But the splitting of the two scenarios and segments gets you down to these numbers, which again add up essentially to the total. So, any further questions about that? I mean, this 2B is the closest to what the board has kind of leaned towards, to use that term again. I think then, given the directive on the working on analysis of pre-K cost scenarios, we would like a volunteer for a subcommittee. And I think I'm kind of limited to avoid having a sunshine issue where I have to notice meetings if we keep it to 4 committee members. We're less than majority of the whole committee. So if we could get four people that would be interested in working on the pre-K scenario.
Are you looking for an analysis to be completed before the next board meeting? What's your timeline? I just asked because the rest of this month are very difficult.
I don't know if I mean, I think it could be work around the timeline a little bit. I mean, we're working internally on some numbers to try to have around pre-K for January 31st. Everything by that would be okay. I think by the end of February.
And I could kind of start the process and kind of give this subcommittee kind of some scenarios for them to kind of review. So that would be a little easier than simply saying, hey, start from scratch. That might move that process timeline along a little.
I'm happy to be on this committee. I would not.
Joe? Thank you.
I'll do what she said.
You said you would chair it?
No, I did what you said.
Help you out.
Marty, okay? Yep. Okay.
Bryan, to the extent you share information, if you can do so in Excel.
Why don't you let
Yeah,
Susan
that would be-
do?
Absolutely.
Marty and I tend to share.
That's only working. I PDF that just for this later.
Brian, Susan's gonna take my.
Susan's gonna
Susan, okay.
replace it.
Super.
Thank you.
So, let me try to get you some preliminary information into this week. Won't necessarily be all the scenarios, but we can kind of lay out some of the.
So and for the January 3rd, some of the takeaways I have from this meeting. One, at the January 31st meeting, I expect we'll really focus on 2B. I know we shared all the other scenarios, but 2B is what really focus on. Try to include some kind of pre-K number. And put that in segment 1, try to include some kind of escalation factor related to, we can get that. And maybe talk about operating, the impact of ongoing operating costs. That's a potential segment.
Yeah, because I think this analysis on pre-K is really about operating costs that we're asking for, right? I mean, if we sort of put in the 20 million at the high range. And then figure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, but there's also like 15 high school in segment 2, and that's going to be 15 years from now. What are the operating costs or the other capital costs we would expect to incur in 15 years?
Can you just give a quick summary of how the facilities closed on the weekend? If you think they're doing.
So I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
The facilities were?
Oh, how they went?
Yeah.
I was at the first 2 of them, which was Woodbury and the high school. Each one had about a dozen people show up. And folks were, that we were told at the outset, these are the, we're gonna show you where the challenges of the building are, so it wasn't a tour of what's been renovated and beautiful in the building, and I think folks were impressed at how large each of the buildings is, and therefore how complicated the systems are, and the scale at which we have to go at it to redo it. I mean, I have my own like personal take on all of it based on, but that's what I saw and heard from.
And there was a pretty significant drop off, I think, for folks who attended the elementary buildings.
I think heard you tell them all, right?
Oh, we heard.
I went to all.
Yeah. So did that,
I actually wrote a little summary. Other than school or city employees, there were 12 people at Woodbury. Of those, 3 were children accompanying parents, 2 were school board members, 2 were Doug and I, leaving 5 other citizens. High school, other than school employees, there were 12 people. One of those was the mayor, 2 were school board members, 2 were Doug and I, 1 was a graduate who now lives in Chicken Falls, leaving 6 other citizens. Lowland, there was only Doug and I, no other citizens. Burnwood, there were 4 people. Of those, 1 was a school board member. 2 were Doug and I, leaving 1 other citizen. It was thin. It was fascinating. I'm really glad I went. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think like probably we should do some more of that. And there's gotta be other ways to let people sort of see it without it having. Because they're just not gonna tell.
that was part of the conversation, was there's an opportunity here to do sort of fly through videos so that people could click on it and look at some of the highlights, and that people would probably access that.
We did that for the moving school, showing a lot of the dams, a lot of the structural issues. We had that. But we really helped.
Okay. So, okay, so I will work with the subcommittee, and then we'll try and advance that as quick as we can. Go towards something later this month. Any other questions on the segment information?
I'm gonna get so much crap from Emmitt.
Until Tony's.
So I'm just going to refer you all to section 2.3 on the various items. There's nothing specifically.
Very helpful.
Yes.
And I went through the November pack, I didn't see anything out there other than just again highlighting. You know, and you're right, general fund is the right term. I think that it's reflected the operating benefit is cranked up, but that 75 million bucks is going.
If we were at our target surplus percentage, what would that number be?
What did you guys decide? Was it 27 or 23 to 1?
How should we do?
15%.
Yeah.
I don't think
I thought-
we're paying.
15.
I mean, that, I think
But
that.
the point is, you got about 50 million bucks. I thought it was somewhere in the mid-20s. About 50 million bucks.
Well, I think it was a range, and it's in one of those old charts, and I can't remember. It was never a official board policy. It was kind of a board discussion.
But it was the number that was thrown out the last time operating levy. I think it was the bar against which it was what needed. Number of just funds. So to the extent
In fact, I
we
think
would use it to offset some of the like anticipated increases in operating costs. I think it might be,
Well, that's what you just don't want to send our cost.
right.
Is it paying for is it the 20 million to fix Ludlow? For your universal pre-K, and another 20 million for the first 2, 5, 6 years of the operating costs, who knows? But I can just be clear about that.
so. So the other aspect of why we need a larger reserve than like that 15% is because our set value hasn't necessarily kept pace with the growth of and the growth of the assessed value is what calculates or determines how much new levy millage raises. So, and you may recall, in 2008, we took a dive, and we're still below our maximum as total assessed value for the district that we were in 2008. We're just a hair below it, but and as I've incorporated into these assessments that we predicted will be up to the $1 billion number.
Yeah, but
right
that's
now.
another 6% growth on the
It
last
is.
assessed value. That's a big number, in my opinion, for this economy.
Yeah. But at any rate, so how much we're generating and potentially in what's projected deficit spending, that you may recall when we go over the forecast, that how much a 6.9 mil raises on $1 billion assessed value versus what we're generating in deficit spending doesn't even cover some of that deficit spending. So to that point, we're using that rainy day fund to help finance those future deficit spending.
Yeah, I mean, it's been very fortunate of being able to go up a little bit.
We have
But
very
very obviously for pushing.
Okay. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Hearing none, then I think we can ask for a
Motion
motion.
and a second to adjourn.
Moved.
Thank you.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign. Adjourned.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Next question.
Tell me that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I never saw that. I just got there.
We have been there for,
Oh.